For almost 5 centuries, the German city of Frankfurt was a city-state within two major Germanic states, the Holy Roman Empire as the Free Imperial City of Frankfurt, the German Confederation as the Free City of Frankfurt. Frankfurt was a major city of the Holy Roman Empire, being the seat of imperial elections since 885 and the city for imperial coronations from 1562 until 1792. Frankfurt was declared an imperial free city in 1372, making the city an entity of imperial immediacy, meaning immediately subordinate to the Holy Roman Emperor and not to a regional ruler or a local nobleman. Due to its imperial significance, Frankfurt survived mediatization in 1803. Following the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806, Frankfurt fell to the rule of Napoleon I, who granted the city to Karl Theodor Anton Maria von Dalberg. The city became known as the Principality of Frankfurt. The Catholic clergy Dalberg emancipated the Catholics living with the city boundary. In 1810 Dalberg merged Frankfurt with the Principality of Aschaffenburg, the county of Wetzlar-Fulda, and Hanau to form the Grand Duchy of Frankfurt. After the defeat of Napoleon and the collapse of the Confederation of the Rhine, Frankfurt was returned to its pre-Napoleonic constitution via the Congress of Vienna of 1815 and became a sovereign city-state and a member of the German Confederation. During the period of the German Confederation, Frankfurt continued to be a major city. The Confederation's governing body, the Bundestag, was located in the Palace of Thurn und Taxis in Frankfurt city centre. During the revolutions of 1848, the Frankfurt Parliament was formed in an attempt to unite the German states in a democratic manner. It was here that Prussian King Frederick William IV refused the offer of the Crown of Little Germany. In 1866 the Kingdom of Prussia went to war with the Austrian Empire over Schleswig-Holstein, causing the Austro-Prussian War. Frankfurt, remaining loyal to the German Confederation, did not join with Prussia. Following Prussia's victory, Frankfurt was annexed by Prussia, becoming part of the newly formed province of Hesse-Nassau. History. Development of the city next to the main street Ziel, at the Rossmarkt, along the city ring and at the banks of the River Main. The wealthy population of the city had spacious houses erected by architects such as Salins de Montfort and Friedrich Rumpf. They also endowed several scientific societies, for example the Polytechnische Gesellschaft and the Physikalischen Verein. In 1819 Friar vom Stein founded the Gesellschaft für alte deutsche Geschichtskunde. In 1825, municipal architect Johann Friedrich Christian Hess built the representative city library. At the same time, the new construction of the Senckenbergischen Forschenden Gesellschaft was developed at the Eschenheimer Turm. This is where Eduard Ruppel started his extended research expeditions to Africa. The Stadtschule, which was opened in 1829, attracted renowned artists from all over Europe, among others Bertel Thorvaldsen, Philipp Vey, Eduard von Steinel and Moritz von Schwind. Civic foundations and clubs also fostered the city's cultural life, e.g., the Frankfurter Kunstverein, the Museums Gesellschaft, the Kasselianverein and the Städtische Theater. In 1828 city gardener Sebastian Rins set aside land for a new main cemetery and a new Jewish cemetery, about 15 minutes from the old city walls. The old cemeteries, which dated back to the Middle Ages, the Peterskirchhof and the old Jewish cemetery, were closed. Also in 1828, the company Knoblauch&Schieler, the first gas works, started to provide private households with gas. In 1830 the city arranged the maintenance of the churches owned by the city, the priests' salaries and the clerical school system in two endowment contracts. A lot of the older and smaller churches, especially the former monasteries, which had been secularized in 1803, decayed or were used for profane purposes. But on the other hand, the new construction of the Paulskirche, which had been in ruins since 1789, was finally completed. The city's urban area only slowly grew beyond the area of the ramparts, which were built on the area of the old city fortifications, firstly along the old country roads. Up until 1837, the wrought iron gates to the city were closed at nightfall. Whoever was late had to pay a fee, like in the Middle Ages, called Sperbatzen, which led to bloody fights in 1830 and 1831. Frankfurt is an important center of transport and trade during the years in which Frankfurt was a free city. The traditional Frankfurt trade fair was of little importance. Nevertheless, Frankfurt rose to be one of the major centers for trade and finances in Europe. The most important banking house in Frankfurt belonged to the Rothschild family, who established banking and finance houses all over Europe. The only other banking house that was comparable to the Rothschild Bank was the Christian-owned Bethmann Bank. Both of these banks dominated the trading of bonds for different European countries. There were several significant uprisings against plans to develop a Prussian tariff union because they threatened to undermine Frankfurt's role as a center of transport and trade. In 1828, the city joined Middle Germany's trade association, which was against Prussian activities. However, they were not able to prevent their neighboring city, Hessen-Darmstadt, from joining the region under which the Prussian tax was implemented. After the founding of Germany's customs union in 1834, of which Nassau also became a member, Frankfurt was the only city that was not part of Prussian customs union, in contrast to the surrounding area. Within a short period of time, trade in Frankfurt had been dramatically reduced. Meanwhile, the trade of neighboring cities, like Offenbach, Hochst and Bockenheim, flourished. In 1836, the Free City of Frankfurt was the last one to join the German customs union. The fortunate location of the city led to the development of Frankfurt becoming a transportation hub. In 1832, England and Frankfurt signed a contract allowing free trade and shipping. For this purpose, the city flag was designed using the traditional colors of Frankfurt: 2 red and 2 white stripes with the Frankfurt eagle in the upper left corner. From the beginning, the city had a leading role in the expansion of the German railway system. All the bankers from Frankfurt supported the initiative, and the first railway shares were in great interest. Nevertheless, negotiations went slowly and the initial construction of the railway did not start until 1839. Frankfurt becomes the federal capital. The Bundestag was headquartered in Palais Thurn and taxis in the Große Eschenheimer Straße starting from 5 November 1816. The member states established delegations in the city. The Central Federal Bureau for Investigations, a central coordinating institution of the political police for the federal member states, had been based in Frankfurt since the 1830s. Black, red, gold. Frankfurt was one of the major centers of the revolutionary movement, Vormars. The journalist Ludwig Born was born in 1786 in a street named Judengasse, in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt. Ludwig Born was the author of satirical writings and later became one of the prominent figures of the literary movement, Young Germany. Because the Federal Assembly and Frankfurt city authorities feared for their reputation, they tried to ban political unions and to suppress the circulation of liberal publications. They were, however, not successful in their attempts to do this. Spurred on by the July Revolution of 1830, oppositional groups in the city of Frankfurt were ablaze with a revolutionary spirit. But the step from idealistic fervor to decisive action failed completely. Made up mostly of students and Polish officers in exile, a group attempting to start a revolution in Germany, called Frankfurter Wachensturm because of attacks made on police stations, was betrayed on April 3, 1833 to the police and was brutally put down by the city's small army. The incident, while largely ineffective, did, however, have a chilling effect on the bourgeois elite of the city because as a result 2,500 Austrian and Prussian soldiers were stationed in the city, representing a direct challenge to the sovereignty of the city, which, in turn, led to royal government diplomats denigrating the Free City as a «liberal cesspit». German national consciousness grew throughout the 1840s. The sculptor Ludwig Schwanthaler created a Goethe monument in 1844, and the unveiling ceremony, for example, became a rallying point for nationalists, as did a meeting of German studies scholars in Frankfurt's important and well-known City Hall, which, just before this meeting, had been decorated with images of all 52 emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, created by artists such as Philipp Wey, Alfred Riethel and Eduard von Steinel. An umbrella organization of Frankfurt's democratic clubs, the Montagsgranzchen, had been meeting since the winter of 1845–46. In the early days of March 1848, the revolutionary spirit from France spilled over to Germany. Like everywhere else, the people of Frankfurt called for the rights of freedom of the press and freedom of assembly, constitutional equality for all citizens, amnesty for all those who had been imprisoned because of political activities, and the right for every citizen to bear arms. On March 3, 1848, the Senate of the city granted all rights except full emancipation of the Jews. The reformists who had met in their Montagsgranzchen called for a reform of the city's constitution. All citizens were to elect the members of a constituent assembly for the city. This assembly was then to work out a new constitution to replace the laws which had been made as a mere addition to the old constitution. On March 9, 1848, a flag in the colors of black, red and gold was first hissed on the roof of the Palais Thurnund taxis in Frankfurt. On March 31, the so-called pre-parliament held a meeting in the Paulskirche, which had been converted from a church to a parliament building in a rush. The walls and windows of the church were decorated with flags in the colors of black, red and gold. The pulpit was covered in a cloth, and the organ was hidden by a big curtain, which featured a painting by Philipp Wey depicting Germania, holding a flag and a sword. The figure was framed on either side with laurel wreaths and patriotic verses. A table for the president was set up where the altar normally stood. On May 18, 1848, the parliamentarians of the Frankfurt National Assembly, among the first free-voted German parliaments, congregated in the Paulskirche in a celebratory fashion. Friedrich Siegmund Juchow, a legal practitioner, was elected as the representative of the Free City on April 28. He was once a reporter for the National Assembly and affiliated with the left-center parliamentary group, Westendtal, and later belonged to the so-called Erbkaiserlichen, a political group led by Heinrich von Gagen. With the increasing resistance and tenacity of the parliamentary debates, the enthusiasm of the people of Frankfurt disappeared. The end of the Free City after the breakup of the National Assembly and the re-establishment of the Bundestag diplomacy in 1850. The democratic opposition continued to advocate their demands, despite the Senate's restorative politics that were considerate of the German chieftains. Nevertheless, the city's antiquated constitution was gradually reformed. In 1853, an electoral reform entitled the residents of the rural district to vote, by withdrawing the senators from courts and legislative meetings. The 1856 judicial and administrative reform established the separation of powers. Trials were henceforth held in public and verbal hearings in the elsewhere already common jury court was established. The Prussian ambassador, Otto von Bismarck, represented the interests of Prussia at the German Bundestag in Frankfurt from 1851 to 1859. The liberality of the Frankfurt middle class and the freedom of the press were much to his dislike. On April 14, 1853, he wrote to the Minister of Manteuffel, regarding the democratic spirit and turmoils within the population of the city and its neighboring regions. I am sure that we will only be able to successfully face these threats by subjecting this particular part of Germany to a military dictatorship, without any consideration of judicial norms or the preservation of these. After years of conflict, the remains of the medieval guild system finally disappeared in 1864. Economic freedom prevailed and even the last restrictions on the rights of Jewish citizens were abolished. In June 1866, right before losing its status as a free city, a direct majority voting system for all citizens was introduced to the legislative branch, instead of the previous electoral procedure which had been arranged according to profession. This new system still presumed citizenship, which meant having at least 5,000 guilder. This new election law, however, was never used before Prussian annexation. Because of the economic structure determined by trade and craft and because of the lack of economic freedom, there was no industrial proletariat in Frankfurt up until 1866. The first Workers' Association, founded in 1863, had only 67 members, of which 33 were tailors. The Prussian-Austrian conflict was, by then, pushing Germany more and more towards war. Even the Congress called by Austria, the Frankfurter Fürstentag, in August 1863 could not come up with a solution because of the Prussian boycott. As a result of the summit's failure, the Frankfurt public, which had long been sympathizing with Austria, was set completely against Prussia. The liberal Frankfurt press was also predominantly anti-Prussian, especially the Frankfurt Oberpostumzeitung, founded in 1617. The Journal de Frankfurt, published in French, and the Handelszeitung, established in 1856. In the satirical magazine Frankfurt Lantern, first published in 1860, editor Friedrich Stölzer criticized Bismarck's policy in increasingly harsh commentaries and caricatures. This led to Prussia having a warrant out for Stölzer's arrest so that he was not able to leave his hometown. However, in the sphere of the German National Assembly, founded in Frankfurt in 1859, there were also influential Frankfurters who believed in the Prussian mission to establish German unity. The movement's voice was the National Liberal Frankfurter Journal, which was subsidized by the Prussians. The Prussian Consul General of Frankfurt was the highly respected banker, Moritz von Bethmann, who had been one of the hosts of the Fürstentag. He later resigned his post in protest against Bismarck's policy. When the German war inevitably loomed in the early summer of 1866, the town remained loyal to the German Confederation, according to its motto, faith in federal law. On 14 June 1866, they voted for the Confederate execution against Prussia, though at the same time declaring that it would not participate in the Civil War. Still, the town was not able to refrain from the entanglements of war, as Prussia regarded the Frankfurt Confederate loyalty as hostile. Bismarck was determined to violently establish the German unity under Prussian rule and to oust Austria from German politics. On 16 July 1866, the undefended city was occupied by Prussian troops under their General Edward Vogel of Falkenstein, who immediately imposed strict reprisals on the town. Only one day later, on July 17, the first payment of 5.8 million guilder was imposed on the town. Edwin of Manteuffel, who was appointed as successor of Falkenstein on 20 July, raised a second demand of contribution of 25 million guilder. This contribution had to be paid by the 35,000 citizens of the free town, among whom approximately 8,000 had to pay taxes. Numerous citizens, among them all members of the Senate, were imposed with accommodations. The citizens had to provide their own saddle horses for the army, and the traders and landlords were forced to hand over large provisions, wine and cigars to the Prussian army command. Publishing was forbidden for all the newspapers of Frankfurt except for the Journal. The editor of the newspaper of the main post office and Privy Councillor Fischer-Goulet was arrested and suffered a deadly stroke. The senators Bernis, Müller and Speltz were held hostage in the fortress of Cologne but were allowed to return to Frankfurt as a consequence of pledging their word of honor. Numerous citizens of Frankfurt escaped to foreign countries, like Friedrich Stölzer, who escaped to Stuttgart, and the natural scientist Eduard Ruppel, who escaped to Switzerland. In the end of 1866, the emigrants were allowed to return according to a general amnesty.